The second my boots hit the tarmac, all I could think about was wrapping my arms around her and our little boy. 7 months overseas, and every damn day felt like a year. You'd think I'd be used to it by now, but hell, the heart doesn't care much for logic. The drive home was a blur of anticipation. When I finally walked through that door, the sight of her, holding our son, it was like I could breathe again. She was all smiles and tears, the kind of welcome home you dream about when you're lying in a bunk a world away. But beneath those smiles, I knew we had our battles. Hers wasn't with some distant enemy, it was in the bottle she thought I didn't know she hid in the laundry room. Not long after, I made the call to my brother. It's time, I told him. Time to get your act together. He was living in our mom's basement, directionless. Maybe it was the soldier in me, but I believed discipline and a change of scenery could turn his life around. So, I invited him to stay with us, a decision that felt right at the time. For a while, things were good, better than they'd been in months. We were a family, truly. We'd spend evenings playing board games, weekends exploring local parks, and every so often, we'd all cook together. Those moments when laughter filled our home. I could almost forget the darkness that lurked in the corners. But peace is often fleeting. Her struggle with alcohol, once a distant storm, roared back with a vengeance. It started with a beer here, a glass of wine there, until one night, she smashed the TV during a drunken rage. Her episodes became more frequent, more violent. I found myself lying awake, listening for the sound of breaking glass or her staggered footsteps, a constant reminder of the battle we were losing. I wanted to save her, to save us, but every attempt to address the problem was met with denial or anger. I can control it, she'd insist, her words slurring, eyes not meeting mine. But the night I found her passed out on the kitchen floor, our son crying in the next room, I knew control was a fantasy. Looking back, maybe I was naive to think I could fix my brother, my wife, my family, but in those moments of fleeting harmony, I saw glimpses of what could be. It was enough to keep me fighting, even when every instinct told me we were headed for a storm I couldn't steer us away from. The night was already shaping up to be a long one. I'd barely stepped in from work when I caught the faint whiff of liquor, that unmistakable scent that spelled trouble in bold, underlined letters. It was coming from the living room, where my brother and she were sitting too close, a bottle of something cheap and strawn on the table between them. My stomach knotted up, the sight like a punch to the gut. Really? The word slipped out, sharper than I intended. My wife looked up, guilt flashing across her face, a look I'd come to know all too well. My brother, on the other hand, just shrugged, the very picture of indifference. It's just a drink, man. Loosen up. But I couldn't. Not with everything we've been through. This isn't helping, I told him, my voice steady but seething with frustration. I turned to her, and you promised. She mumbled something about it being just one time. But we both knew that was a lie. The bottle was half empty, and her eyes were already glazed over. That night, after my brother stumbled off to his room and she passed out on the couch, I lay awake, wrestling with a decision I never thought I'd have to make. The next morning, the house was thick with silence. Over coffee, I laid it out for her, as gently but firmly as I could. This can't go on. I can't watch you destroy yourself. We can't live like this. Her eyes filled with tears, but beneath the sorrow, I saw a flicker of resolve. I'll try, she whispered. I'll do better. For a while, she did. The bottles disappeared, and our home felt lighter, happier. We found joy in the small things again, in weekend picnics and movie nights. It was like a second honeymoon, a brief glimpse into the life we could have had, should have had. But then my brother lost his job. He said it was downsizing, but the bottles hidden in his room told a different story. Tension simmered, filling the house with a sense of impending doom. His presence, once a source of support, now felt like a weight dragging us down. Her slip-ups started small. A glass of wine here, a beer there. Each time, she brushed it off with a promise that it wouldn't happen again. But each broken promise was a crack in the foundation of our marriage, a slow, steady chipping away at my trust and patience. I thought we were past this, I said one night, finding her nursing a glass of wine in the kitchen. The look she gave me was a mix of defiance and shame, a silent challenge. "We're just having a hard time right now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not like before. I can handle it." But I knew better. I'd seen this play before, knew every line by heart. Yet, each time, I hoped for a different ending, one where we'd emerge unscathed, stronger. I wanted to believe her, to believe in us. But as I looked at her, at the distance that had grown between us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something irreversible, a chasm too wide to bridge with promises and half-hearted attempts at sobriety. The cracks were showing, and I was running out of ways to patch them up. I walked in from work, the house quiet except for the murmur of voices from upstairs. It was a normal scene, too normal maybe, but the pit in my stomach said otherwise. You learn to trust your gut in my line of work, and right now, it was screaming that something was off. Dropping my keys on the counter, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to head straight up, confront whatever was happening head on. But then, the other part, the part that remembered every argument, every broken promise about sobriety, every shattered piece of trust, kept my feet glued to the floor. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving into icy water, and made my way upstairs. The laughter from my brother's room cut off abruptly as I approached. "Hey, just checking in," I called out, trying to keep my voice light, casual. No answer. I knocked, once, twice, then pushed the door open. They were sitting on the floor, a deck of cards between them, and a bottle. His, no doubt, tucked away almost out of sight. "We're just hanging out," my wife said quickly, too quickly, her eyes darting away from mine. "Yeah, just killing time," my brother added, his voice a bit too nonchalant. I nodded. The words lodged in my throat. This was not the confrontation I had imagined, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. I forced a smile. "All right, just making sure everything's good here." But nothing was good. The house felt smaller, the air heavier, as if we were all actors in a play none of us wanted to be in. Dinners were silent affairs, punctuated by the clinking of cutlery and the occasional forced conversation about mundane things. Anything to avoid the elephant in the room. My brother's drinking, once a background concern, had morphed into a constant, looming presence. It was as if his bottles were bricks, building a wall between us, with my wife on the other side. I'd catch glimpses of them, whispering in corners, sharing secretive smiles that once were reserved for me. And with each passing day, I felt more like a stranger in my own home. The isolation was palpable. I was living with them, but I was on the outside, watching a bond form over shared vices I couldn't compete with. The more they leaned on each other, the further they drifted from me, leaving me to navigate my thoughts and fears alone. I knew I should confront them, tear down the facade and face the mess head on. But fear held me back, the fear of what acknowledging the truth would mean for us, for our family. So, I did nothing, hoping against reason that this tension was just a phase, that we could return to those brief moments of happiness that now seemed like distant memories. But hope is a tricky thing. It keeps you hanging on, even when every sign points to the inevitability of fallout. And as I lay awake at night, listening to the soft murmur of their voices through the walls, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching my life unravel, thread by thread, with no idea how to stop it. The silence of the night was deceptive, a calm that masked the storm brewing under my own roof. It was one of those quiet evenings where the world seemed at peace, and for a fleeting moment, I let myself believe that everything could be okay. That belief shattered at 3 a.m., when I reached for her warmth only to find cold sheets. Panic set in first, the kind that tightens around your chest when something precious is missing. Our son was asleep, a soft sigh the only sound in his dark room. But she was nowhere, her side of the bed untouched since I last saw her slip out for a supposed bath. The house was silent, too silent, as I moved through it. Then I heard it, a whisper of sound from my brother's room, a betrayal wrapped in a hushed laugh. My heart raced, each step towards that door heavy with dread and disbelief. Pushing the door open without a knock, the world tilted. There she was, curled up in his arms, a picture of comfort and intimacy that sliced through me like a knife. For a moment, nobody moved, the shock of my presence paralyzing them. What the hell is this? My voice was a stranger's, rough and shaking with anger. It was as if my question broke the spell. She scrambled up, her eyes wide with panic, words tumbling out in a desperate plea. It's not what it looks like, I swear. Please, you have to believe me. But belief had left the room, chased out by the undeniable truth before me. My brother, the silence from him deafening, offered no excuses, his guilt written plainly across his face. I turned to him, my voice cold, final. Get out. Now. He didn't argue, didn't beg. With a resigned look, he grabbed whatever was within reach and left, the weight of his betrayal heavy in his slumped shoulders. Left alone with her, the air between us was charged with 1,000 unspoken words. Her tears, her apologies, they meant nothing now. The trust we built, the life we shared, crumbled in an instant. I didn't mean for this to happen, she sobbed, her desperation palpable. But intent mattered little when faced with the wreckage of our lives. The room felt suffocating, each plea from her a reminder of the chasm now between us. I wanted to scream, to rage against the betrayal, but exhaustion won over anger. The fight, the constant struggle with her demons, and now this betrayal left me hollow. As she cried, pleading for a forgiveness I couldn't find within me, I stared at the space my brother once occupied. His quick departure, a silent admission of the unforgivable line they crossed, was the only truth I needed. The rest of the night was a blur of silence and distant sobs. I sat there, in the living room, the darkness a fitting companion to the turmoil inside. Betrayal from those closest to you carves a deep wound, one not easily healed by time or tears. As dawn broke, the reality of what transpired settled in, a heavy cloak around my shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, every step into the future now shadowed by the past mistakes. How to proceed when every direction seemed paved with pain and betrayal? That question echoed in the empty house, a reminder of the long, lonely road ahead. The moment I stepped outside, the crisp morning air felt like a slap, shocking me back to reality. The night's events replayed in my mind, a relentless loop of betrayal and heartache. Amid the turmoil, one clear thought emerged. I needed to protect my son and myself, even if that meant considering divorce. The very idea felt like giving up, admitting defeat in a battle I never wanted to fight. But with every step I took, the weight of our son's future pressed heavily on my shoulders, guiding me toward a decision I never imagined making. As I wandered through the neighborhood, lost in thought, I couldn't help but feel the eyes of the world on me. Whispers filled the air, rumors spreading like wildfire among peers and neighbors. The community we once called home had turned into a jury, casting judgment without knowing the full story. Did you hear about him and his wife? They didn't need to say more, their looks said enough. Feeling isolated, I reached out to the only lifeline I thought I had left, friends. Surprisingly, or maybe not, I found solace in shared experiences. Over quiet conversations and late-night calls, they offered not just their support but their own stories of struggle and survival. You're not alone in this, they reminded me, a beacon of hope in the storm. Meanwhile, back at home, the situation with my wife spiraled further downward. In my absence, her condition deteriorated, the lack of a support system evident in her erratic behavior and neglect of herself in our home. The image of her, once vibrant and full of life, now a shadow of her former self, haunted me. Despite everything, the thought of her suffering twisted a knife in my already wounded heart. My greatest fear, though, was for our son. The impact of this toxic environment on his innocent mind terrified me. The idea that he might grow up in a broken home, witnessing the downfall of his family, spurred me into action. I began to research, to plan, to prepare for the possibility of fighting for his custody. The thought of being separated from him, even for a moment, was unbearable, but I knew I had to do whatever it took to ensure his safety and happiness. But with every step forward, financial realities yanked me back. Legal fees loomed large, a mountain of potential expenses that threatened to bury me. Alimony, child support, the cost of starting anew. It all added up to a sum that felt insurmountable. I juggled numbers, made calls, sought advice, but the financial strain was relentless. Another enemy in a war that seemed to have no end. As I faced each day, the challenges mounted, but so did my resolve. The journey was daunting, filled with legal battles, financial struggles, and the fight for my son's future. But in the heart of that fight, I found a strength I never knew I had, fueled by love, fear, and the unwavering determination to build a better life for the one person who mattered most, our son. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The morning after felt like waking up to a nightmare, except the harsh light of day refused to dispel the darkness that had settled in my heart. Betrayal, a concept once foreign and distant, had become my constant companion, whispering doubts and fears with every solitary step I took. The emotional toll was more than just a burden. It was a physical ache, a relentless reminder of the loss that seemed to permeate every aspect of my life. Trying to navigate the world in this new, unwelcome reality, I found my social circle diminishing by the day. Friends, once a source of comfort and camaraderie, became ghosts, fading into the background. Some chose sides, aligning with her out of loyalty, or perhaps their own misconceptions. Others simply didn't know what to say, their silence a chasm that widened with each passing day. The feeling of isolation wasn't just emotional, it was palpable, a tangible void where warmth and fellowship used to reside. Work became my refuge, a place to drown out the noise of my crumbling personal life. But refuge can only offer so much solace when your foundation is shattered. My concentration faltered. Tasks that once demanded minutes now stretched into hours, and my relationships with colleagues grew strained. The whispers weren't just in my head anymore, they had infiltrated my workspace, their speculative glances and hushed conversations a mirror to the judgment I felt from the outside world. Amid the chaos, the practicalities of separation demanded attention. Finding temporary living arrangements for my wife was a puzzle, each piece laced with guilt, frustration, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The options were limited, fraught with logistical nightmares and financial implications that seemed insurmountable. It was a dance of negotiation, of trying to maintain some semblance of civility in a situation that was anything but civil. The fight for custody of our son, however, was where my resolve hardened. The thought of him caught in the crossfire, of not being there to protect and guide him, fueled my determination. The courts decided on supervised visitation for her, a small victory amidst the battlefield of our disintegrating marriage. Those visits, though fraught with tension, were a lifeline. Watching him interact with her, I saw the flickers of the family we once were, a reminder of everything that had been lost in the fray. Each day brought its own set of challenges, a relentless wave that threatened to pull me under. Yet, in the face of overwhelming odds, I found moments of clarity, of purpose. The fight for my son, for a future free from the shadows of betrayal and pain, became my beacon. Amidst the ruin, amidst the isolation and the relentless toll on my spirit, I clung to the hope that on the other side of this darkness, there was a light, however faint, guiding us towards something resembling peace. The dawn barely broke when the weight of the world seemed to crush down on me. My reputation, once untarnished, now lay in tatters, muddied by whispers and judgments from those I once stood shoulder to shoulder with in the military community. Every sidelong glance, every whispered conversation behind my back, was a reminder of how far I had fallen, not by my own doing, but by the actions of those I loved. In the midst of navigating this personal hell, word came that my wife faced legal consequences for her actions. It was a double-edged sword, validation of the wrongdoing, yet a complication in an already tortuous divorce process. As much as I wanted to move on, each new legal hurdle felt like being dragged back into the mire. Amidst it all, a gnawing guilt consumed me. Could I have prevented this? Was there a moment, a decision, that if made differently, could have altered our path? These questions haunted me, echoing in the empty spaces of our home, in the silent moments before sleep claimed me. The internal conflict was relentless, a battle with an enemy that knew all my vulnerabilities. Yet, in this darkest of times, a flicker of light emerged from a small group of close friends and family. Their support became my lifeline, a reminder that not all was lost, that amidst the rubble of my life, there were still those who stood by me. It was a glimmer of hope in a sea of despair, the strength I needed to face each day. This ordeal forced me into a deep self-reflection, questioning not just the actions of others, but my own. What role did I play in the breakdown of our family? It was a bitter pill to swallow, acknowledging that blame, perhaps, was not solely to be placed on the shoulders of others. This introspection was painful, yet necessary for healing, for understanding, for moving forward. As the divorce proceedings escalated, they became a battleground of wills, each side fighting bitterly for what they believed was theirs by right. The contention between us was palpable, a tangible manifestation of the love that once was, now twisted into resentment and anger. The culmination of this ordeal was the custody hearing, a day I approached with a mix of dread and determination. Standing before the judge, arguing for the right to raise my son, I felt the weight of every decision, every mistake, bearing down on me. It was more than just a legal battle, it was a fight for the future, for the opportunity to rebuild from the ashes of my past. Through the stress, the uncertainty, and the endless legal skirmishes, I clung to the belief that this, too, shall pass. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, but the support of those few who remained by my side offered a beacon of hope. In the depths of despair, I found resilience, a determination to rise above the wreckage, to forge a new path for my son and myself. The journey was far from over, but with each step